Now we're going to be talking about Disney and other animated titles. We're going to go in chronological order because that's how I have all my stuff organized. Disney titles are very important for the fact that starting in the 90s, really, they started going back and not only doing extensive digital cleanups of their classic animation titles, but that's where their practices of tampering with the original work started. So you have to start going back to the older transfers and then in a lot of cases collect different transfers for some of these films to try and best recreate what was originally there, or at least have something closer to what the original intent was. So starting with Pinocchio, this is the original CAV release, I believe I think this is from about the late 80s, early 90s. There are earlier ones, but this is the first version with digital sound. This is the, it's a print source transfer that's seemingly closer to what original dye transfer Technicolor prints would have looked like. It's a nice disc. It's a 1:3:3 because this is still Academy ratio. It's full CAV, so it's actually very nice quality for the time. If you go any earlier than this, the disc before this, I believe, is the same transfer, but it's not quite as good. And this one's a little bit cleaner. It's the last reissue of this before the remastered version came out, I believe in '93. But this is the CAV version. And the way you tell CAV versions on most Disney discs of this type is you got to look for the little triangle here in the upper corner, and it will actually identify if it's a CAV disc. If it's not, it'll usually say stereo laser disc or video laser disc if it's not stereo encoded. And this does have the original mono track. And of course, gorgeous artwork, very nice, and you could pick these up for pretty cheap. It's good to have because this really doesn't look like any other version, and the Blu-ray's an abomination, so there's that. And now we have the remastered version from '93, as mentioned before. Digital soundtrack. It is mixed into Dolby Surround, so you can matrix this back out on your receiver and get a mono surround channel and a center channel. As you can see, stereo laserdisc, so this is a single CLV disc. The CAV version came in a nice box set. I'll show that in my box set video. As you can see, nice artwork. You know, talking about this is the newer restored version. There's not really any changes made to this other than bringing the original mono track into Dolby Surround, which, you know, is not really necessary, but they were trying to get it as good as they could with the current home theaters of the time back in the early 90s, and it really just serves to add more ambiance, especially for the songs. You know, but at least they didn't go back and completely remix everything, so it's still basically the original mono track for the most part, just kind of expanded. There are a lot of discs that came out in the early 90s that did this, where they either inserted the stereo music stems for the score, or tried to expand the sound effects to stereo so they could have a stereo special edition release. But anyway, in terms of what it compares like to the old one, this one, the color is a bit different because it was supposedly, you know, newly mastered from vaulted elements. So it is nice to have. This master was also used for the first DVD release, but then everything since then has been new and tweaked and redone and everything. So it's nice to have this with the stereo remix in PCM. The CAV version is a bit better in quality because it's not on CLV, but you know, you can find these for pretty cheap. Sometimes those Disney box sets can cost a bit and they take up a lot of shelf space. So this is a nice version to have. You can get them pretty cheap. Moving on, we have the CLV version of Fantasia. Same thing with this one. This is a very common title. The big CAV box set is huge. It's one of those box sets that just doesn't fit on a regular shelf. And Same thing with this one, digital soundtrack mixed into Dolby Surround. However, with this one, Fantasia introduced the concept of Fantasound, which was essentially a very early 4.0 discrete surround sound system that was used for the premiere engagements and then kind of abandoned since it wasn't deemed a success, which is silly because a 4.0 system in 1940 is just the way they got it to work technically is brilliant. But then that 4.0 mix was kind of lost to time, and most everybody saw it with the mono soundtrack, and most video releases were in mono. And of course, Fantasia has been cut and censored and redone in various ways, and this release was an attempt to get it closer to what it was originally in 1940 and to recreate what the Fantasound experience was using Dolby Surround. And it works very well. There still are, if I remember correctly, there's still a couple things missing from this, but this was the last release to feature the original narration by Deems Taylor. So that's why it's important to get one of these. Show you the back. And of course, it's got beautiful, lovely artwork and chapter stops. Got a little punch out on this one, but and you can get these very, very cheaply. They're extremely common. But a lot of people want to hold out for the CAV box with the special features and the lithographs and stuff, but you know, it's a very big unwieldy box, so don't pass up on these CLV discs if you come across them cheap, because they're wonderful, they're well made, and you know, they're important pieces. So you know, it's not a whole lot of difference from the CAV version. So very important release here. All right, moving on to Bambi, we have the older CAV version. This is an older transfer. It has slightly different color to the later remastered version, which we'll get to next. And it has a stereo digital PCM surround track, not surround, it's a stereo PCM track. Of course, the film was originally mono, for all that I know, so the stereo is a sort of remix of the mono, but it sounds fine on my system. But it would have been nice to have the original mono intact. But it's a very nice transfer, good color, and like I said, it's important to have these older Disney transfers simply to, you know, see what they used to look like, and of course, newer or older, one may be more theatrically accurate if you actually were ever able to compare it to original higher generation sources, which, given how Disney treats their titles, is very unlikely. Here's the back, beautiful artwork, you know, inspired by the film, nice little write-up, and chapter stops here, explanation about standard play, very similar to the others, and nice release for the time. Of course, this would also be kind of the late 80s, early 90s here. So there's that. And then moving on, here is the 55th anniversary CAV restored version of Bambi. This here is another where they went back and tried to clean it up and get it as best as they could for home video at the time. You see it does carry a THX mastering logo, so the transfer was at least spot checked by THX. It has a stereo track mixed into Dolby Surround on the digital track. New artwork. Here's the back with the chapter stops. Special feature listing, and this is a gatefold. Yeah, let me slip this out so you can get a glimpse. Very, very nice gatefold. I love the gold lining, and the gold lining around the box really gives it a really nice feel. Here's the other side. I don't know if you can see, here's what it looks like all together. Probably cuts off a little bit, but this is a very, very lovely packaging, very, very gorgeous, and you know, very straightforward. It's not a box set, unlike some of the other CAV discs. This version is, like I said, it's a different transfer. It's got slightly different color. It's technically better than the older one, less noise and things, but it is different. And I do believe the sound is a little bit different. I think they may have tweaked that original stereo mix, because this one is actually mixed into Dolby Surround, so it does sound different. And I think, I may be wrong, but I think this release has the original RKO opening logo, because Disney films were originally distributed by other companies. So I think this one restores the opening logo. I think it's RKO, I may be wrong. But of course, it's very hard to keep track of which releases have the original distribution studio logo. So another one you kind of just have to have because it's slightly different. And that was also used for the first DVD release, if I'm remembering correctly. All right, moving on. This is the Masterpiece CAV Collection release of Dumbo. This one actually does have the original mono track, thank goodness, in PCM, so there's nothing going on there. This is part of their white case Masterpiece Collection line. This was before, well, these were kind of started in the early 90s, and it was the same thing. They were trying to get their titles to be as good as they could in the home video formats at the time, so they put a little bit of extra care and attention into doing these. As you see, very similar artwork style with the layouts and everything. And you have your chapter stops. And let's see, this is a gatefold too. Yeah. With these Masterpiece Collection releases, you get gatefolds usually with very extensive liner notes about the production and history of the film, with production photos and some lobby cards and things and stills, which it's all extremely nice, and they look very good on a shelf put next to each other because they kept the designs very uniform, even for the live action films that came out in this way. And I'm kind of sad they didn't do all of the films under this banner, but the ones that they did, you know, they're all very, very well done for the most part. So that's Dumbo, and that's really the only release of Dumbo you need because it's a good transfer with good color, and it's CAV and mono on the PCM. So at least there's one where you only need one. All right, now we have Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, the classic Disney double feature. PCM mono on the digital soundtrack. This is a CLV disc. Doesn't really have a whole bunch of special features or anything because it's just a practically a movie-only disc. This didn't come out in CAV as far as I know, but for this, it's a very good transfer, nice sound. These two really haven't been messed with in the ways that other Disney films have, so you're pretty much going to be good with most any version of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, but you know, it's nice to have more of the original collection on Laserdisc, and it looks great and it sounds great, so it's one where it's actually thankfully pretty simple. Now we move on to the original CAV release of Cinderella. I have the box set of this, but we'll do that in the box set video. But this, like Pinocchio and Bambi and the others, CAV version, older transfer, so it's a little bit different in its color and sound. Sound is in stereo, so that's probably a remix of some type, because it should have been originally mono. Digital PCM, so it does sound good, and it's a good transfer with good color, but it is nice to have as an alternate to the later 1990s box set cleaned up version. Here's the back, and as you can see, they kind of kept with the same artwork style. Got your chapter stops and notes about it being standard play. So you know, it's another one of these older discs that's you kind of need for completion's sake, or if you're like me and you want to compare all the different transfers you can. That's why you have to hang on to them or track them down. It's also available in CLV. I haven't seen that one, but I would assume it's practically the same, just without all the CAV benefits. Next, we have the original CAV release of Peter Pan. Same thing here. Older transfer, slightly different color to later transfer, slightly different look. Stereo mix in PCM. Again, I would think it was originally mono, so I believe it's a remix of some type, but again, with some of these, it's hard to tell if there ever was an original stereo mix because And starting in the 50s, really, a lot of films would sometimes have stereo versions that only played in the premiere dates or various things like that. And even going through the 60s and 70s, there are all kinds of sound alternates. So here we have the back. Same style cover design. Get your chapter stops and some critical blurbs this time, so it's not quite as blank looking as the back of Cinderella. I mean, these are nice releases that you can pick up for pretty cheap. Don't let somebody overcharge you just because it's Disney. You might want to pay, you'll probably pay a little bit more for the CAV versions, simply if you're trying to get the best possible quality out of these older transfers, but the CLVs are no slouch, so I've just been trying to track down all these CAV versions. Later on in the 90s, they did a remastered version of Peter Pan. This got the newer style kind of gold foil cover type, so this is kind of what they switched to and from doing those white Masterpiece Collection covers. So different transfer, it's full CAV here. It's got different color timing, and obviously it's technically superior to the older version, less noise. It also has a stereo track in PCM, and it's mixed into Dolby Surround, so you do get a center channel and a mono surround out of it. So it does sound like a different mix from the older disc. It was mastered by THX, so they approved the transfer. It's gatefold, so it's the front panel. I love the way they started using the sides of the jacket and then kind of give wraparound artwork in the center. It's very nicely put together. I'll show you the back. And as you see, they're still sticking with the box design for all of the information and the chapter stops, but it's a little bit fancier. It's a little bit nicer to look at, a little more pleasing on the eyes, easier to read everything. But they did several titles like this, kind of closer towards the end of the format. I think this was about 95 or 96, something like that. So kind of more mid to late 90s for these. So that's another one you kind of have to have as an alternate. Speaking of alternates, this is an interesting title for that. Lady and the Tramp was one of Disney's first, or actually I think it was the first, truly widescreen animated feature that they did. This was done in CinemaScope, and the original version of CinemaScope, which was 2.55 to 1, so it was a bit wider than what it eventually became the 2.35 most people are used to, because original CinemaScope formats had a space for 4-track magnetic sound. So all the early CinemaScope releases usually had a 4-track stereo magnetic sound mix that would play in the big premiere engagements of the big theaters in the big cities. And then they also had mono mixes for the regular prints that everybody else got because we weren't fancy enough. Anyway, so this is the cleaned up 90s CAV letterboxed release. This was as far as I know, this was the first release of the CinemaScope version that was not pan and scanned. And I don't think it's quite the full 2.55. I think it's kind of more like 2.35, because a lot of these CinemaScope films, when they first were coming out in their early transfers, usually they didn't preserve the full 2.55 for some reason. Either they couldn't, or they weren't able to, or the element they had was slightly cropped, or the telecine was cropped. So you'll find that on a lot of films, like even The Bridge on the River Kwai was stuck that way for a little while until the, quite a while until the Blu-ray release. But anyway, so this has a stereo mix on the PCM tracks. It also has a Dolby Digital 5.1 AC3 track. They're the same audio tracks, it's just the Dolby Digital is discrete 5.1. So if you have your RF demodulators, you can enjoy that. It was THX mastered, so it at least got their stamp on it. Lovely gatefold. Not a lot of text on this one, but nice. As you can see, they went for a wide image to kind of nail the point home that this was, the scope version. Very nicely put together. I like the usage of the purple. Here's the back. Same thing. They stuck with their design with the box with all of your relevant information, some nice text, and some artwork. So that's that version. But we don't stop there with Lady and the Tramp, because Disney was kind of worried about this whole widescreen thing. So he had them hand animate a completely separate Academy 1.33:1 ratio version. And I know what you're saying. Why would you have two versions of the same movie? Well, this was pretty common in the days of, early widescreen. There were some films that were shot twice, where they were shot widescreen and then they were shot normal Academy ratio, what everybody was used to, because they didn't know if this newfangled widescreen stuff would work. So Lady and the Tramp did get released in Academy ratio, usually for the smaller markets that weren't equipped for widescreen. But over the time, this quickly became lost, and it's really a shame, because it is a completely different version. Some of the images have been completely recomposed, and there's different animation to some of them because it's now 1.33 instead of 2.55. So in order to track this version down, if you buy the DVD or the Blu-ray and they say, oh, we have the alternate version, most of the time it's actually a pan and scan job of the CinemaScope version. The only real way to track this rare Academy alternate down is you have to find, I think it came out on VHS as well with this same cover artwork, but you have to get this Laserdisc. And a lot of times they actually come in these jackets where they're actually mislabeled as being the widescreen version. So it's got the same artwork. It's CLV instead of CAV. But if you actually play this, it's the 1.33:1 Academy ratio version. So this is a very important alternate version that you can get for pretty cheap, but you got to actually sit there and compare, because sometimes you do wind up getting the CLV widescreen version. So it has the same soundtracks. It's also THX mastered. So it has 5.1 and has stereo PCM surround. So as you see, it's the same otherwise. So it's marketed like it was the CinemaScope version, but it is actually this rare alternate Academy ratio version. So, and ironically, when I first saw this film on tape as a kid, I didn't know it at the time, but instead of having a pan and scan tape, I actually had the Academy ratio version on tape. So that's why it looked quite nice, and you didn't have chopped off heads and lopped off sides and scenes that didn't make any sense because they were pan and scanned poorly. So that's one that people don't talk about too much. That's very important. Now, here's a classic live-action title, and for my money, probably my favorite Disney theatrical release. This is the masterpiece, the archival collection version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This is a beautiful-looking package. Very straightforward. I believe it's CLV with maybe some CAV sides. Yeah, it's a mixture of CLV and CAV, and it has some special features and primarily some of the Disney television specials about the film and the making of the film. I believe it's a 2:3:5 transfer, so I think it's another one that it doesn't quite get that full 2.55 CinemaScope ratio, because this is another. This was a huge gamble shooting this film in CinemaScope, a big special effects live action movie in CinemaScope. So the fact that it actually worked was a real gamble that paid off. Let me open this up for you. So same thing, really nice liner notes, production stills, various images from the film, and you see they're actually shown in widescreen. So another reason driving home the horrors of pan and scan. Unfortunately, this copy has a hole punched through it, but it's not bad. I got it at a good price, so that's okay. And of course, it has a nice glossy feel to it, which helps. It makes it a little more legible to read everything. Here's your chapter stops. Of course, it feels a bit fancier. So let me show you the back. On the backs of these, you see you have the original poster artwork and the listing of some of the special features, and talking about, oh, this is exclusive and we made it as nice as humanly possible. And as you see, they even say the 2.35 to 1 CinemaScope ratio when this was actually 2.55 to 1. That was an issue you ran into for a good number of years, and still do in some cases these days. But with the advent of Blu-ray and new HD scan techniques, they've been able to much better grab the entire frame, CinemaScope bumps and all. Audio is PCM mixed into Dolby Surround, and this film did originally have a surround track. It had the 4-channel CinemaScope with the mono surround, so left, center, right, and surround in the back. The DVD has a 5.1 mix, and either cleaned up or tweaked transfer, has slightly different color. Most notable, when you first put this in, you'll notice the curtains for the opening titles are a completely different color than the DVD, so which is correct, I don't know. I've never been able to see a print of this, but it was also restored for Blu-ray, and it was never released on Blu-ray, so they did a big, there are tons of write-ups online about the audio restoration and the picture restoration, but it's never been released. It was shown once or twice in theaters, and who knows if it'll ever come out. It's reputed the HD version you can download on iTunes is from that restoration, and I really hope it isn't, because that is full of revisionist teal coloring, so hopefully that never comes out that way, because that looks pretty bad on the iTunes version. So next we have the Masterpiece Collection CAV version of The Sword and the Stone. This is an important title because the Blu-ray release of this is DNR'd, or noise reduced, to an inch of its life, so avoid that release at all costs. It's horrible. They practically took all the film grain out of it, in addition to recoloring and all that junk they usually do. So this is very straightforward, good transfer. It has the original mono on the as PCM. Gatefold release, same thing with the nice liner notes. Just another one of these nice Masterpiece releases, very straightforward, very well put together, very appreciative and loving of the film, similar design to the others. I always love these random trivia boxes on some Laserdisc. It's like, well, I guess back then you could print trivia on there because people couldn't just look it up online. So this is pretty much the only version of this film on Laserdisc you need, and you can get these for pretty cheap. So, moving on to the Jungle Book, here is the older CAV version with a nice transfer with interesting color. Again, it's an older transfer, has a different color timing to it. Has digital PCM. It's a stereo track that's mixed into Dolby Surround, so you can decode it for center and mono surround. Let me show you the back. As you can see, nice design with film elements on there. Nicely laid out with the kind of jungle foliage in the back. Got your chapter index here. Pretty straightforward. Just another one of these that you can pick up if you want to see what the older versions look like. Here we have its remastered version, 30th anniversary version. Same thing with the gold foil, CIV as well. This was passed through THX to get their stamp on it. Has digital sound. I believe it's also it's also a Dolby Surround encoded track, so it is stereo with the surround and center channel. Show you the gatefold. This is really nicely laid out with each song and all of its lyrics. You can sing along if you don't know them already. I kind of like how they did this. I'm not really one for musicals or any of the songs. That's usually my least favorite part of a Disney feature. But that's just me, I admit it. But I do think this is a very nice addition to this release. Kind of wish all of the classic films would have something like this with all of their famous songs. And they actually have little photos kind of accompanying what scene they pop up in as the film. Show you the back. You see, similar design. You have your chapter box here, some nice text and some nice film images there. So a good release. I believe they also used this same transfer for the first DVD. Practically all of the early 1999-2000 DVDs under that gold collection were usually from the Laserdisc well, the last Laserdisc release. Now we have the Aristocats, 1971. This is the CAV version. This is another one of those where it doesn't get a big deluxe release. It's not generally considered one of the more top-tier Disney titles, but it's still an enjoyable little picture. The CLV version looks identical, except the triangle on the top is different. It has a stereo PCM, so it does not have mono. If I remember correctly, on one of the analog tracks, I think it has a Spanish bilingual track. So I don't know why. It's just listed that way on the LDDB, if I remember correctly. So I guess that's kind of nice for you Spanish speakers out there who are looking at Disney Laserdisc. Similar back cover design. You have your chapter index here kind of boxed off. Not a special edition release, but it's a good 1.33 transfer of this film. This film was released in a matted widescreen version in theaters, or it may have been shown Academy. It's one of those films where there's debate over what the intended aspect ratio is. I think the first DVD uses this same source and is 1.33, and then later versions are 1.78, 1.85. I think there's a 1.66, so I don't know what the correct ratio is. But if you look at one side by side, there's advantages to 1.33 and there's advantages to 1.66 or 1.85. So, but you know, if you want the 1.33 and you want PCM, this is the way to go. It's a nice transfer, and you can get them very cheap, especially for the CAV version. Next, we have the special edition of Bedknobs and Broomsticks. I just picked this up not too long ago, so it's still sealed. Got your blurb stickers, a PCM digital track in stereo. I'll show you the back. I haven't really seen this since I was a little kid, so I can't really tell you too much about it. It's just when you find Disney titles and they're in this shape and pretty cheap, why not? Because you never know what they may have changed later on or tweaked or what have you. So, nice release. Got your chapter stops and everything and information about the film. And there's that one. Now we have the older CAV release of The Rescuers. This is a 133 transfer with digital sound. Believe it is the original mono. You see, you can usually look for a stereo logo. Yeah, it doesn't have one, so I think this is the original mono. Nice cover art featuring all the characters from the film. And of course, this version is uncut. Later on, for the letterboxed and last VHS release, and the letterboxed Laserdisc, parents found when they freeze framed certain images, if you freeze frame on the dive, when the albatross, I can't remember his name now, can't believe it, makes the first dive off the rooftop, as they pass by all the windows, if you freeze frame it, the animators put in the silhouette of a naked woman who had been undressing. So some parents got really upset, and the last versions were recalled and then put back out with that basically blacked out, and every version since has been that way. So if you track down the last Laserdisc version and you get the uncensored version, then good for you. This version, of course, is also uncensored. So good transfer. I don't have the later one because I haven't found one without that particular bit of censorship. But you know, this is a good release, and it is 1.33. So most newer versions are letterboxed, I believe. So that is a nice alternate, and it has the original mono. So it's a nice disc you can pick up for pretty cheap. Anytime you can get any of these with the CAV intact for relatively cheap, that's pretty good. A lot of times you do have to pay a little bit of a premium for CAV titles, especially on Disney discs. So here we have the original older transfer of Robin Hood, CAV. I believe it's mono PCM. And don't think they reissued this one, so this is pretty much the one you need to go for. You know, very simple back art. It's an older release, you can see, because they have this colored bar here on the side, but very simple, 1.33. Later issues have been letterboxed, so that's another reason to pick this guy up. But there's that one. Now we have the CAV version of The Great Mouse Detective. Has the original Dolby Surround mix, because this came out in the 80s, so it's PCM, so it's good for that. not a special edition, so very straightforward. Nice usage of the whole Laserdisc art space there, I think. So you can get this one for pretty cheap. Now we have the original CAV release of The Little Mermaid. This is a 1.33 transfer. Of course, the film was letterboxed originally. It was widescreen. So, but this, you don't really lose a lot of information. I think it's more of, you know, opening up the mats a little bit. I think you lose a little bit on the sides, but I'm not a huge Little Mermaid expert or anything. But it is nice to pick this up for the original digital soundtrack in PCM. It is the Dolby Surround. So you can matrix that out, and it sounds very nice. It's a very nice sounding track. Color's very good. The transfer's good. It's kind of older, it's from the early 90s, so it has a little bit of noise here and there. And yeah, it is CAV. It is full CAV. You can get the CLV version, and it's same transfer, but CLV. You can get this one for pretty darn cheap, but it is nice to have as an alternate because the later version from the 98 or 97 theatrical reissue has a remixed 5.1 soundtrack in different color in this letterbox, so that's why it's important to have this one. Here's this. You can see the typical Disney back cover art design. So there's that. Now we have Rescuers Down Under. This is another CAV release from the same time period, has the same cover design. You can see this is pretty much what was used for the VHS, and they didn't even bother using the whole Laserdisc area. Dolby Surround digital soundtrack, so great sounding release because this is a 1990 film during the days of Dolby SR, so very, very nice. It is 1.33, like Little Mermaid. You lose a little bit on the sides, and it kind of opens up the top and bottom a little bit. It would have been nicer for it to be letterboxed, because this film really wasn't designed for 1.33. I think they just kind of protected for it, but still not bad, and how most people saw it on video if they didn't see it in theaters back in the day. So, and of course, newer versions are letterboxed. I think the Blu-ray is pretty nice, but I'm sure the audio track on here is probably better. Same thing, you have your typical chapter box. At least this one on the back uses up the whole Laserdisc space for artwork. So, and this is the only release, so this is all you have to look for. Next we have the CAV release Beauty and the Beast. Has the original Dolby Surround track as PCM, which sounds very good. The CLV version is identical, just has a different colored tag up here. See, it has a gatefold, so let me show you what this looks like. I actually printed the chapters inside. And there's that. And here's the back. Now on this version, there are some color timing differences across versions, so a lot of people kind of prefer this one. Some prefer the VHS version, which has a different color timing, but I think this is a nice one to have because it's very cheap. It's one of the more common Disney titles. You get the CAV version for like $3. And it has the original soundtrack, which sounds great. So, and later releases have tweaks and stuff, and then I think they have the version where you can watch it with the extra song added back in. So this is nice to have. It's very cheap to preserve roughly something closer to what the original theatrical version was like. But again, color timing, some people say it's closer to the VHS, some people say it's closer to this, or some people say that neither really is correct. So it's one of those where nobody can really agree. Yeah, I think, if I remember correctly, I think this might be, I can't remember, this one might also be 1.33. It doesn't say. I think it also is 1.33. So this is another one where you kind of lose some on the sides. If I remember correctly, I don't think it's letterbox. Yes, it is. I'm an idiot. Never mind. Scratch all that. It actually says letterbox up here. Usually they say it somewhere down here. So never mind. It's very easy to get yourself confused on Disney titles. Next, we have the work in progress version. A lot of Laserdisc collectors know this one. This is a very rot-prone title. So this is one hard to find without rot. I don't think this one has very much or I can't remember if it doesn't, if it has any. But this was the work in progress temporary version that was shown, I think, shown at the New York Film Festival, and has some additional sequences that were later dropped in animatic form. Digital soundtrack with Dolby Surround encoding, so this is just an alternate to have. Nice gatefold, kind of similar to the Masterpiece Collection, with the liner notes on white. And you have a chapter index here. Here's the back. So if you find one of these, just be prepared. It's probably going to have some rot somewhere. So next, we have the gorgeous CAV release of Aladdin. This is probably my favorite cover artwork of any of the Disney releases. I just think it's gorgeous. I wish this had been the theatrical poster. It's just wonderful. Let me take it out of the sleeve here. You can get a better look at it. It's glossy as well, so it really kind of jumps off the shelf. Letterbox transfer. I think it's pretty close to the 1.66 of the original. It's kind of hard to measure Laserdisc transfers. You have to just break out measuring tape, and trying to do that on a CRT is very difficult. So has the original Dolby Surround track and PCM. I've read reports that this was mastered from the original theatrical SR Printmaster track, so it sounds wonderful. Of course, it does have the one or two little bits of censoring. The opening title song was changed. One of the lyrics was changed, so I think this has that change put in there. And then also, if I remember correctly, I think the line that Jasmine has about when she tells the tiger, "Good kitty" or something, someone misheard that somewhere, and so that was censored on a lot of releases. So I don't think either Laserdisc has those. I don't think any video release has those intact. I think you have to go to the soundtrack CD, or if I remember correctly, for some of that stuff. But anyway, those things aside, fantastic release. Gatefold, where they kind of went for more of the animated drawn style instead of actual stills. You have your chapter index here. So here, hang on, we have the back here. Nice usage of the actual entire Laserdisc rear cover. This was mastered by THX, so they got their stamp on there. I will say that in spite of everything, this does have a little bit of noise on some players in terms of when you're actually watching the transfer. You get a little bit of noise in some of the more brightly colored areas. It is a better release, a better transfer than the CLV version, but the CLV version is just fine. You know, it's a great little disc. It has seemingly the same exact soundtrack and PCM, but this has the nicer cover and the full CAV treatment. But I just wish the picture quality was just slightly better, because otherwise it's fantastic for Laserdisc. So, but the cover alone is worth it, and these go for a couple bucks, so they look great on the shelf, and you don't have to deal with a big bulky box or anything. All right, here's the last Disney title of the non-boxes. This is just the regular CLV letterbox copy of The Lion King. The CAV box set has all the special features and stuff, but the transfer is the same. It's just CAV, and this is CLV. THX mastered, so they got their stamp on there. Has digital PCM Dolby Surround on the digital tracks. Has the Dolby 5.1 AC3 digital, so you can decode that and enjoy that. This is letterbox at about 1.66. It's pretty much the only version that doesn't have tweaks and songs added. And then starting with, I think, one of the later DVDs and then the Blu-ray, there's some reanimated sequences. So this is a title that if you want the original theatrical version, you pretty much have to go back to Laserdisc. It's a very common title. You can get it for about $1 usually if you just get the CLV version. But the great thing about this is the sound is fantastic. And this is one of those titles where I actually kind of think the Dolby Surround is a better listening experience than the 5.1. It just seems a little bit more enveloping, and sometimes, you know, this was still when digital sound was struggling to take over in theaters, and a lot of theaters still show Dolby Surround with Dolby SR in theaters, and some theaters just didn't even upgrade to digital. And then of course, if your Dolby AC3 went out in the theaters, it would revert to the SR tracks as the backup. So the idea is that you wouldn't notice a change. So they were still mastering for Dolby Surround at the time. So some films, especially around this era, Batman Forever is another one where the Dolby Surround just seems more enveloping and better defined than the 5.1. But of course, I'm splitting hairs here. Both sound great and to each their own, but I just thought I'd mention that. So here's the back. Nice usage of the whole Laserdisc art space. I got your chapter index here. Like I said, this is just a regular release, but still a very nice disc. Kind of like Aladdin, there's a tiny bit of noise, not quite as much as Aladdin, a tiny bit of like chroma noise in some of the more brightly colored scenes. So that's something to look for if you're really into comparing video quality and stuff. But still a very, very great release. You can use this to, you know, see how good your display and how your player works. So it's a very, very, very nice transfer and fantastic sound. So. All right, well, that does it for Disney. I've got a couple animated titles here, actually 3, I think, so I'm going to go ahead and do those here. This is the MGM release, well, actually reissue of How the Grinch Stole Christmas and backed with Horton Hears a Who. These have the original mono tracks as PCM, so they are the best sounding release of all of these. Later releases have been remixed, or they just have lossy mono. So very nice 1.33 transfer, the original aspect ratios on these. And of course, Grinch was later remastered, and there's some controversy over the color changes that came out of that, where the Grinch himself went from the kind of sickly yellowish green to a more vibrant, almost neonish green. So if you want to see this exactly the way it was on television, kind of how you remember growing up with it, you want to find this issue. There's an earlier issue that doesn't have digital PCM, so you want this one. It sounds wonderful, almost like you're listening to the if you were listening to a vinyl soundtrack version of this with Karloff's narration. It just really comes across in the PCM very well. Show you the back really quick. This is something nice to pull out around the holidays, and it looks really great on a CRT. So I believe the first DVD of this uses the same transfer because it has the same color, and then it was the reissue DVD and then the Blu-ray that has the color changes, which are supposedly more accurate, but I can't. It just looks wrong to me because I'm used to this. As even this printing here is kind of the yellowy look that's in this version. So I just picked this up, and I throw it on during the holidays. So there's that. All right, next to last, there were a couple releases of this series on Laserdisc, and here in the States. Unfortunately, Speed Racer was never released in its complete and in its entirety, like it was in Japan as the original Mach Go Go. Mach Go Go Go, sorry. That came out as a box set for the original Japanese version, but there was a release by Vid America, who did a lot of VHS tape versions where they just took the original 16mm prints done for the US syndication, and they did one Laserdisc, which I'm still trying to track down, and then Family Home Entertainment got the rights in the mid-90s, and they did the last VHS releases before Speed Racer Enterprises took them over and then made the Digibeta masters that were used for the various DVDs, and have all kinds of time compression issues that are still present on the otherwise lovely new Blu-ray release from oh, I'm blanking out here. Well, anyway, I can't remember the Funimation's new Blu-ray release. So Family Home Entertainment did 3 releases of Speed Racer. This is one. It has the 2-parters of The Fastest Car on Earth and Race Against Time, 2 great classic episodes, directly transferred from 16mm prints, except this has really great color, all of the FHE releases on VHS and Laserdisc have good color and are a lot better quality than the earlier Vid America and other ones. And I've been collecting the various VHS releases simply to try and find the episodes without the time compression that's added on a lot of the DVDs and even the Blu-rays. So that's a bit of a challenge because there's very little documentation about all the various releases. So, very nice release. If you see one of these and you're a fan of Speed Racer, you might want to pick it up because it does have the original opening and closing titles and credits, which are pretty much recreated digitally on the new Funimation Blu-ray, but this has the original with all of the mentions of the Translux company that's now defunct. Those have been removed for copyright issues, so if you want to see this exactly the way it was in the 1960s and the best quality possible, you want to pick up this. There's another release with, I believe, the episodes, the Secret Engine and the original 2 episodes, the first 2 episodes of the series, The Great Plan. And then they also did a release of the theatrical compilation Speed Racer the movie, which combines the Mammoth Car episodes with the Car Hater episode, interspersed with some vintage commercials. So that was done in about 92 or 91, and that was how I was first introduced to Speed Racer. So that was later released on DVD, and you can still find that on eBay. But it's not quite the same layout. They moved the commercials to being extras. So you'll want the VHS or the Laserdisc if you want it exactly the way it was theatrically. So I hope to find some of those others eventually, but they're kind of hard to come by. All right, last but not least, we have this letterboxed CAV release of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The reason why you want this issue is that, just like the rescuers, the animators snuck in a couple of, shall we say, naughty frames. Can't remember exactly where they are, not anything crazy, but of course these were later censored and removed because this was distributed by Touchstone, which is part of Disney and everything, so Disney does not believe in any of this stuff. So the later Laserdisc from, I think, 97 or 98, which also has a CAV version and I think a director's commentary, while technically more proficient, is without those. So this is the release you want if you want the complete 100% original version with those frames intact. Of course, it has the original Dolby Stereo track as encoded Dolby Surround on PCM, so it sounds great. No remixes to worry about. It is a letterbox transfer. It's very nice. I don't have the later release, but of course that being from the late 90s, like 97, 98, it would be technically more proficient than this one. But this is a nice transfer, and you can actually get this for pretty cheap because most people aren't aware of those frames being taken out. So definitely pick this one up if you see it, if you're a fan of the film and you want the version with the censored naughty animator frames. So this is just another one of those tidbits of trivia you pick up, and this is it's a nice disc for the time. So it's letterbox with the original soundtrack. I don't think it has much in special features, if any at all, but yeah, so hopefully I can find the later release to compare at some point. But all right, well, that does it for that part of the collection. Hope you enjoyed it, hope it helped, and hope I didn't ramble on too much. Thanks, and hope you check out more of the collection vids.